Hi everyone. Good evening, and thank you all for coming to this Smart Nation and Conversation webinar organized by the Smart Nation and Digital Government Office and the People's Association with the support of the Civil Service College. The topic for tonight is building a caring and compassionate society through tech. Before we begin, some housekeeping issues. We'll start with a panel discussion followed by Q&A. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Zoom, you can ask questions through the Q&A function in Zoom. That's the button that says Q&A at the bottom right corner of your Zoom screen. You can also upvote each other's questions, and that will help me identify the most important questions or the ones that you really want most answered. If you would like to address your questions to a particular speaker, or all the speakers, do indicate at the front of your questions, whether it's for Lisan, for Gaurav, or for Kerry. But yes, thank you for joining us tonight. This is a very, very timely topic given the growing demands placed on the social sector due to the pandemic. And indeed, we've seen how tech can enable ground-up community-driven efforts and better match needs and assets. How has technology helped Singapore to become a more compassionate and caring society? How can it do more, and what are the risks we have to manage? To help us think through these issues tonight, we have three panelists. The first is Ms. Tan Lisan, who is the CEO of the National Council of Social Service, NCSS. She was previously Deputy Secretary at the Ministry of Communications and Information and has served in many, many other agencies, including the Ministries of Finance, Manpower, the Public Service Division, and the Civil Service College. Next, we have Mr. Gaurav Kirti, the co-founder and CEO of Better SG. He'll be speaking tonight in his private capacity, but in his day job, he's also the Deputy CEO of the Cybersecurity Agency and previously had a career with the SAF. And finally, Ms. Kerry Tan, who should be no stranger to most of you, is a strategic advisor and founder of Daughters of Tomorrow. That's a nonprofit that enables livelihoods and financial self-sufficiency for low-income women in Singapore. She's also an MP for Nee Soon GRC and advisor to Nee Soon GRC grassroots organization. So we'll begin with a panel discussion for tonight, and let's jump straight in. My opening question to all the panelists is to get the, I guess I could ask you to start by talking a bit more about your organization's work in the social sector, and what are your observations about how tech has been an enabler in the social sector? Maybe we start with Lisan and then Gaurav and Kerry. So Lisan, please.
Thank you so much, Vani. And a very good evening to everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. So thank you for inviting me. Maybe I'll start by talking a little bit about what NCSS does for those who might be unfamiliar. So NCSS, our work is really guided by our vision of every individual being empowered to live with dignity in an inclusive society. So a lot of our work seeks to empower individuals, families, communities through planning services and through funding these services for various vulnerable groups. So these may include vulnerable families, youths at risk, children at risk, seniors, persons with mental health conditions, persons with disabilities. So we work with various agencies, SG Enable, which is a one-stop point of contact now for persons with disabilities and their families. Of course, AIC for seniors. We are also a member organization, so we have 400 social service agencies as our members. We call them SSAs. So we work very closely with them to develop the capability so that they, in turn, can develop quality, innovative services for vulnerable communities. At the ecosystem level, we work with stakeholders, to create a dynamic ecosystem with funders, corporates, and so on, ground-up community groups. So the question that Bernie asked, about how tech can be an enabler, actually, it's a huge enabler for many vulnerable groups. I think for persons with disabilities, for example, assistive technology allows them in many ways to communicate better, to reach out, to connect. And this is so dignifying, right? And so empowering. And things like, for example, telecounseling. Has also helped people take advantage of services when they might previously have been reluctant to go down to the centers, for fear of stigma and so on. So it's very, very empowering, potentially very empowering. Vani didn't ask the question, but maybe I will also address the flip side of it, which is that, it's not without challenges, obviously. And, I talked about people who can benefit from telecounseling. I think the reverse is also true. During COVID and circuit breaker, we know that there were increased incidences of family violence. In such situations, obviously, families who are victims, people who are victims of violence, would find telecounseling at home particularly challenging. So it's not without issues. And of course, we are all familiar with people who may not be so digitally literate and therefore can't take advantage of tech. So seniors being one good example. Yeah. So, but that being said, there are many opportunities, and for social service agencies, for example, although many are ahead, there are some who are ahead on the digital curve. There are also others who are behind. So during circuit breaker, we did note that there are SSAs who lacked even basic infrastructure. Like the network connectivity. So, I would be on a meeting with them and then, the call would drop. And for many of these SSAs, I think it was very, very challenging. But, I think one of the best things that came out of this crisis is that there is this momentum now, there's this recognition, of the promise of technology. And in a survey that NCSS did with our SSAs, digitalization came out tops as the one thing that they want to retain, following this crisis. So I think that's very, very promising. We do really hope to sustain the digitalization efforts that started during this time. We want to build on the digital literacy of groups that were introduced to technology during this time. And we also want to solidify, the impacts and the benefits of collaboration. So, okay, I will stop here. Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisan. That was a great introduction to NCSS's work, and also a great context setter to the real complexities of actually talking about tech and how we help SSAs. Over to Gaurav, actually, to maybe tell us a bit more about Better SG and what you're observing on the ground.
Thanks. So actually, Lisan's context setting was perfect, because I'm glad that organizations on the ground are recognizing the importance of digitalization. Let me start by explaining a little bit about what we do in Better.SG. We basically supercharge and drive tech for good in Singapore. Tech for good is a global movement to think about how technology can be used to bring out the best in people. And it's a very fundamental question. There's a lot of criticism right now about commercial technologies that are perhaps bringing out the darker sides of human nature, or are using human nature for purposes that may not be ideal for societal well-being. And so there's all of this downsides to technology, but we flip that question around and think about, what if we design technology to bring out that best part of every person? So that's where we come from. What we do is basically three things. The first is we are the community watering hole for the Tech for Good ecosystem in Singapore. We gather the people who care about using technology to do good things. And these are not just coders, these are not just technologists, it's multidisciplinary. It's doctors, it's lawyers, it's healthcare workers, it's professional social workers. It's a whole variety of people whose common uniting point is that they believe technology can do more. So we bring that community together. The second thing we do is we think about building innovative digital tools to address social issues directly. We don't often see technology being used specifically to do social good. We see technology often used to enable organizations to do social good. But we're thinking, what if we build tools that address the social issue head on? And we address it in funny ways, interesting ways, creative ways. We gamify things. And so I can talk a little bit about that later on, but that's basically what we do. We build innovative digital tools to address social issues. The third thing we do is actually consultancy. Just like Lisan mentioned, we know that there are many organizations out there that would really benefit from being digital, and they don't quite know how to get there. We have a team of people who are keen, eager, and ready to work with nonprofit organizations to help them digitize in small ways and hopefully in big ways. Now, in small ways, it could be something as simple as just figuring out how to use video conferencing tools. And this might sound simple to us today, but not all organizations have it figured out, particularly because not all of their beneficiaries, the people they work with, may be able to access those tools easily. So maybe some parts of it do require a little bit of rethinking and redesign. And not all tools are equally suited for all use cases. So we have a team that helps people think through the simple digitization. But at a deeper level, we also help them digitize the process. So if you bring in new volunteers, how do you onboard them in a purely digital world? So that's the consulting part of things that we do. And then on your last question about what we're seeing on the ground, it's exactly as Lisan mentioned. there's a surge of interest because of necessity. We started Better before COVID. And actually, we've been doing Tech for Good for many years now before this whole context came about. But there was much less interest because digital was kind of a good to have. It was an optional add-on. The manual processes were fine. Nothing was really broken. If Excel can solve it, why do anything better? But we're starting to see, particularly in the last 7 months, organizations and individuals recognizing that digital is a necessity. And once you realize it's a necessity, actually it's an enabler for doing a whole bunch of other things, like getting 500 people into this conference at 8 p.m. on a weekday night, which would not have been possible pre-COVID.
Thanks indeed, Gaurav. That was a fantastic introduction to the wonderful work in the civic tech that Better SG is doing. Carrie, can I go over to you to talk about what your experience has been as a founder of a nonprofit itself, and maybe as well as your position as an MP, you have a good touch with what citizens are experiencing. So yeah, your take on this, please.
Okay, I'm going to be speaking in the capacity of founder of DOT, and from the perspective of a young charity that's, well, only 6 years old, rather small. Yeah. We have now about 15 or 16 full-time equivalent staff, but a whole community of volunteers of, I don't know what it is right now, probably about 500 volunteers. It's been growing, and COVID has not stopped us. In fact, COVID has enabled us because of the push towards technology. So for those who are not familiar with Daughters of Tomorrow, we work with low-income women from families, low-wage families, right? And we're trying to help them build the confidence, build their skills, and to connect them with employment and sustained livelihoods. So in our 6 years journey, we actually really embarked on teching up our operations sometime in 2018 when we decided to use Salesforce to do case management. It was a big decision because, like I mentioned, we're very small, but it's been a good decision. And I think on the operational front, using a platform like Salesforce, a technology platform, has helped us to keep a tighter, closer track of the progress, activities, and our programs outreach to the women, our interventions to them, as well as chart their journey with us, in the sense that we are now able to have a pool of data that we could assess and analyze for our impact evaluation. So that's one aspect of how digitalization and moving a lot of our operations online in terms of the case management and tracking has helped us. On the other front, with regards to mobilizing resources and volunteers, we've been using a lot of free technology, such as Workplace on Facebook, Google Drive, even just WhatsApp groups, right? And it has really helped us to connect very well, very quickly, and very accessibly to a large network of volunteers, like individuals, citizens, or even corporate partners who are coming to serve in various ways to enable the women. Yeah. And Workplace we have a befrienders network on Workplace where they share information and resources with one another, and we share success stories as well, share best practices of what befrienders can do to better help the women navigate. And also we have recently started another Workplace group just for women beneficiaries, so that they can connect with each other and access the support group very easily just from their mobile phones. So these are some of the ways that we have used technology from the perspective of a small organization.
That's perfect. And actually, that's a great segue to, I think, the one question that's on top of everyone's mind, right, which is the impact of COVID-19 on the social sector. So I wanted to get your thoughts on what the immediate effects have been, but also what you think the long-term or the medium to long-term impact of COVID-19 has been on the sector, as well as how tech has helped to alleviate or not alleviate these short and long-term challenges. So maybe we'll start this way, start this round in the reverse direction. So maybe Carrie, we start with you, talking about what you've observed from a single charity in this case.
Right. So before COVID, right, we ran a lot of our confidence building classes and training classes for our women physically, at family service centers, at CCs, etc. So when it was on lockdown mode, we were like, what's going to happen, right? How are these women going to come to class? And even though before that, we already have an IT literacy program going, where corporate partners came and we provided secondhand laptops, access to software, etc., to women. We now see that we need to quickly and hasten the scale of this IT literacy program in order for the women to come and do confidence building, almost like we have to reverse the order of things. So I think the good impact that COVID-19 brought was our stakeholders in the community, whether they are funders, donors, sponsors, partners, volunteers, they all recognized that there was a need for us to reach out to our women and continue the momentum of our engagement with them. And they came forward very quickly. They came forward to support us with more laptops. I think they started giving us dongles and sponsorship for data SIM cards so that the women could access internet because they may not have Wi-Fi at home. So there was a surge in support, and I think it has greatly accelerated our women's access to hardware that otherwise would have been provided to them at a much slower pace. Now, that being said, is not to say that everything is perfect, because during circuit breaker, we don't forget that the kids were doing work from home. Home-based learning and adults were doing work from home. So we still ran into issues where there were bigger families, multiple children, and they did not receive, I mean, it's not that, they could receive a laptop for every child in a very timely manner. I think there was a huge scramble all over Singapore, and Engineering Good did their best to help bring. So there was still a shortage of, I would say, hardware accessibility despite the upsurge. So I think this continues to be the case. I think we are trying to ramp up. I think all sectors are trying to ramp up to provide this accessibility to vulnerable families. And I do think there's a long tail, other issues that could come with it that we may want to discuss later on. But this is how COVID-19 has impacted us. And glad to say that the team, maybe because we're a young team, people pivoted very fast, and we managed to bring our flagship program, Confidence Curriculum, into an online platform, which is now called Power Up Online, where we run the entire course on a Facebook group. So that worked out pretty well. Yeah, that worked out pretty well.
That's actually a really inspiring sort of illustration of how Singaporeans have pivoted in the midst of a pandemic, both to go digital, but also to step forward and help their fellow citizens. Gaurav, from your perspective at Better SG, you work with a team of people who have lots of gifts to give in this area. So I'm wondering what your observation has been of how COVID-19 has affected the social sector.
I mean, I'm not going to say that COVID-19 has been a good thing, but the silver lining to all of it is that it has brought out this need for technology and brought out the people who have these skills in technology to want to help. We exist both as a non-profit organization ourselves. So we are a 300+ member organization that is also a non-profit, but we are a non-profit that helps other non-profits. So it's a little bit meta. I don't know how to fully describe it. But even internally, prior to COVID, we had decided upfront that our volunteering model would be a remote model. Because we had people who were tech talents, who were working in San Francisco, who were working in London, who wanted to help us. And so we could not, at the start state, design our organization to be a group of people who meets in a room to discuss things face to face. We had to start with the idea that I want to bring in the guys from London and New York and San Francisco to help us, because that's where some of the best Singaporean tech talents have chosen to work for a little while. Hopefully we can bring them all back. But even if they choose to stay there, I want to bring their talents back. I want to bring their skills back to be able to help here. And they're very keen to do that as well. So we existed as kind of this hybrid virtual entity already. That being said, once people were locked in to their homes, whether it's home-based learning, work from home, whatever it was, they realized that that element or the skills that they had in technology could be used for more than just their company. So we saw a surge of people who came to us and said, well, we heard you guys do tech for good. I've got design skills, I've got developer skills, I've got user research skills, I've got all of these skills. How can I be of assistance to you? And so we found the community coming together without us asking. We have not done any marketing, we've not told people who we are, we just kind of exist, but people are telling each other, they're like, hey, this group does this stuff for other organizations. Even the consultancy work that we do for other nonprofits, we haven't actually published, well, I guess tonight we're publicizing it. But it came from word of mouth because people were looking for something like this. So Carrie was fortunate that she has a team where there are people who are comfortable using these tools and understand the pros and cons. Not all teams have that technical ability. And even if they do, they don't know how to go about getting simple things like discounted rates for nonprofits. So as part of our process, we don't just tell you what the best tools are, we also tell you how to apply for the discounted rates for nonprofit organizations so that you can get the most value for the limited money that we know all nonprofits have. But the most important thing that we found is that the expertise of having deep skilled technologists come to you and talk to you and understand your problem and give advice, that was worth much more than what we could pay for. And many of the organizations said it wasn't the technology that was expensive, it was the access to the talent that can give them advice on technology that was invaluable.
Thanks a lot, Gaurav. And I really, really hope that the Singaporeans who started volunteering either here or abroad continue to do so, and that their volunteering now is sticky and continues past the immediate crisis. I wanted to ask Lisa what your view is from the system as a whole, or from the social sector as a whole. What are you observing about COVID's immediate and long-term impact?
Yeah, so let me pick up on Gaurav's point actually about how different parties and stakeholders stepped up. Actually, we saw so much of that. It was so encouraging during this crisis, right? So earlier I mentioned about how SSA, some of them were unprepared for circuit breaker. They didn't have the infrastructure, the networks. So we had so many technology companies, step forward to help in so many different ways. So I'll just give a few examples. One was actually Thundercode is a smallish Singapore company. So they, curated a whole list of all the freeware that's available, the applications, video conferencing, and so on, that our SSAs could take advantage of, posted that online, all the pros, cons, specs, everything, right? So that at one glance, SSAs could know where to go to, what would work for them or not. We had companies like Amazon Connects who came in, helped SSAs like WeCare convert their, telephony lines to cloud-based call centers so that their counselors could take calls from home. And also community, so the like of Tech for Good, Engineering Good, Tech Ladies, for example, they actually, provided help to SSAs, hotlines, walked SSAs through the tech help that they needed. So actually a lot of these, we really hope, can be solidified even post-crisis, this stakeholder sort of everyone coming together. Then I think in terms of one of the really immediate impacts on users, this idea of digital literacy, and there was a question about haves and have-nots. So during circuit breaker, when everything was done mostly online, obviously there were some people who were a little bit left out, in the first instance. But it was so heartening to see people step up, volunteers coming in, and Carrie talked about how there were some workspace communities to help each other out, support networks, and we really hope some of these also will carry on. So I'll just give another few examples of the creativity, the resilience that we saw among SSAs and the users. So Minds, for example, they serve persons with disabilities. They were very worried about these people at home not being engaged, and some concern that they might regress. So they created a lot of home learning kits. They did thrice weekly Zoom sessions, Zumba, yoga, and the way the persons with disabilities responded was remarkable, and it just shows, right, actually what people are capable of that we might otherwise have assumed that they were not. Seniors, for example, so Lions Befrienders, they did a lot of virtual befriending. So volunteers were roped in, and they also taught the seniors how to make use of tech. So by virtue of that, right, you get seniors more comfortable with technology. Another example on seniors, cycling without age. So in normal times, they bring seniors on trishaw rides through the city, but with circuit breaker, that was not possible. So they did virtual trishaw rides, and the great thing about that is, so even for bedridden seniors, for example, in future, right, this becomes an option. I think one of the maybe long-lasting effects is how people also are now more open to doing things in different ways. So one example is digital fundraising. Here I'm going to sell a bit of my own koyok. So we had a ComChest, which is our fundraising arm. We had a a campaign, You Never Walk Alone. Actually, it was initiated by NCSS advisor, Speaker Tan Chuan Jin. So, you know, it was a digital fundraising campaign. We did our very first live show on Facebook. Our fundraising sort of, you know, far exceeded expectations. But I think what was even more positive was not just the fundraising, right? It was also the community that we built up, you know, the parties, the partners that we rallied together. And these were numerous. You know, corporates, IHLs, Institutes of Higher Learning, students, community. I understand that it was not just a Liverpool thing, that different football clubs also came together, you know, in each their own jerseys and all, you know, stood together in solidarity to support this. So new ways of doing things. I think this is the long-lasting impact that very optimistic about.
That's fantastic. Yeah, indeed. And hopefully that the people keep sticking with these creative new ways of doing things. And hopefully, I guess the one thing I'm really hopeful about is that the relationships that people form as a result of their getting involved in different causes and different groups lead to them continuing to keep helping out fellow Singaporeans. The interesting thing that all three of you have mentioned, I mean, I think one of the issues it raises is this issue of capacity building within these different organizations and within Singaporeans themselves. And I guess when we think about capacity building, we think about different resources. And perhaps for Singapore, the number one issue is always people issues, right? So we know, for example, at least within the tech sector, there's a huge amount of competition for tech talent, even within the private and the public sectors. And so I guess that raises the question of where that leaves the nonprofit sector, as we talked about. And I guess that's why we also talk about the digital upskilling of people who work as professionals or even as volunteers to help pick up the slack. So maybe this time we'll start with Gaurav, right? How do you encourage the Singaporeans with skills to come forward and volunteer with projects? And where do you think the skills gaps are here in this regard?
That's a fantastic question. I fully agree that people are the most important part of this equation. So we do tech for good. One of the good things about, one of the fun things about marketing it is that the opposite of tech for good is, or tech for bad. And we argue, we don't even have to argue very heavily. Whenever we talk to young tech people and we tell them, look, you've studied computer science, you've got these great skills. We encourage you to go out there and make a living. But if the rest of your career is spent trying to optimize a shopping cart to get $1.20 extra from the customer, would you be satisfied with how you've used your skills in life? And quite quickly, all of them are like, no, I want to do more than optimize shopping carts. I want to do much more with the knowledge that I have to help communities than figuring out how to take an extra dollar from them. And it's not that taking that extra dollar is bad. I mean, it's a capitalist economy. They should be thinking about these things. But beyond that, what else can they do with all of this? So it's actually quite easy to bring people in. The challenge is not that the people are unwilling. It's that actually individuals across different companies, across different tech organizations, don't have a way to come together to do something meaningful. And technology is one of those things where it is a team sport. It is not just one single genius developer who can solve problems on their own. And in fact, I'm very worried about single genius developers who think they can solve problems by their own. The reason why social problems are complex is because they involve human nature. And if you think that all of human nature can be reduced to algorithms, then you're probably taking a wrong approach to it. So we bring human nature into the conversation by working with SSAs, VWOs, and by making sure that every project that we work on has that multidisciplinary element. So while people, particularly in the social sector, believe that they can turn to tech teams to solve the problem, actually the problem has to be worked out together with the communities themselves. I would just add one other point in terms of this people element. For a long time, the model of volunteering has been big blocks of time, particularly in technology. The hackathon model is, I'm going to lock up 25-year-old developers in a room, provide them with pizza and beer, and at the end of it, miracles will appear. That whole concept, I find it bizarre. Firstly, locking up people in a room with pizza and beer for whatever length of time doesn't achieve much aside from changing your weight. What we need to do is actually unlock those doors, bring these communities out to the real world, make them integrate with the VWO, make them learn, understand, talk to the communities, understand the issues, understand what technology can do and where the limitations are, And there are a couple of questions here about what the limitations of tech are. We are very clear, tech is not the silver bullet. It will solve parts of the problem. It'll make parts of the problem easier to address, but it should not be seen as the silver bullet to solve all of those communities' issues. I think nobody expects that from us.
Thanks, Gaurav. Carrie, from your perspective, like what are the main issues with tech knowledge or skills that an organization like yours encounters on the ground? How do they overcome these challenges? And I guess from your experience with Daughters of Tomorrow, how did you start building up the skills to take advantage of technology within your own charity?
Actually, I have to clarify one point. There's zero tech staff in our current staff strength. And I think thanks to the last couple of years where skill-based volunteering became very popular, and as Gaurav mentioned, a lot of young people, they may be in jobs, in corporations, very talented, but they're also yearning to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And what we do at DOT is, and I think we do that very well, is we have amazing collaborations with companies on their corporate social responsibility programs. To the extent that when we needed to revamp our website, we had a corporate partner, Accenture, come and build a website on WordPress, which looks amazing now, I think. Go check it out. And we did not have to spend a single cent. Right. And even when we embarked on Salesforce, which is enabled in part by the VCF funding from NCSS, even though we also had to use some of our funds for it, we had consultants. We also engaged a consultant, but we also had volunteers from Salesforce who worked hand in hand with our own staff to help them and train them along. So in this kind of collaborations, in this kind of CSR partnerships, right, what happened was through working with the private sector talents, our own people gained capacity and gained new knowledge and skills. Our women gained new knowledge and skills. So it's this capacity transfer that is incredibly valuable to us. In fact, today I learned a new term from a friend who came from Silicon Valley, had a career in the Bay Area, and he shared with me how he observed the way DOT has been doing our work, right, and developing our programs, etc., the curriculum for the training for women, etc. He taught me the term copy left. I'm like, what's copy left, right? And basically in the tech world, Gaurav, let me know if this is true, verify. Copy left means like somebody has an idea or built something, and then you keep it open and different people can come in and continue building on it. So they has different versions and different applications. And that essentially has been how all of our programs that we run at Daughters of Tomorrow have evolved and grown. So in a way, I was like, oh, okay, I'm not very techie myself, but good to learn this kind of lingo. I sound more techie, but it really, I don't think it's absolutely necessary for a young charity or a small charity, if you don't have the funding at the moment, to go hire like a full-time tech person. I'm not sure whether a full-time tech person is absolutely necessary to do the volume of work, which may not be a lot in a small organization or smaller scale operation. But there is certainly talent that we can leverage on in the private sector. And this, in a way, cross-pollinate, right? And through journeying with us, I think what the corporate volunteers gain is a deeper understanding and insight into social issues and the work that social service agencies do that they otherwise will not have the opportunity to get to know. Yeah.
Thanks, Carrie. Lisa, I guess for you, what are the issues that you are seeing with upskilling professionals in the social sector and building capacity as well? And we actually have some questions coming in exactly on this topic from the Q&A. So how do we help professionals in the sector who are not tech savvy? Is it about training them to adopt new skills? Is it about adopting technology? What's your take on this?
I'm happy to give my take on that, but I think Gaurav wants to talk about copy left, so why don't I let him do that first?
Okay, Gaurav, go ahead.
No, very quickly. So Carrie, yes, that is a thing. But this whole concept of open source is basically a benevolent spirit in technology where we want to share the code that we're working on, share the ideas that we're working on. And even better, very early on, philosophically, we decided that every single project that we work on is going to be published on projects.better.sg so that the idea is open sourced, people can understand what we're working on, contribute to it, and build on it. And so early on in the pandemic, there were 4 or 5 different projects that were trying to digitize the hawker to delivery service systems. We basically went out there and said, look, all 4 or 5 of you are working on similar problems. Let's all chat and coordinate. And similarly, there were many other multiple overlap solutions to deal with specific problems. We brought them together like, look, let's coordinate. We share what we have. We build something better together. And so that spirit is something that's a very strong one and very useful one moving forward as well. And I think that builds on Lisan's point about that idea of collaborating across sectors, across issues on solving social problems.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, on the issue of capability. So actually, you know what Kerry described about zero tech staff in DOT, you know, that is hardly unique to DOT. Many SSAs are in that situation. I was involved in on the board of an SSA that had 700 staff, and the number of IT people they had, 1. So I think that's the situation, I think, in SSAs, and it's compounded by the fact that, you know, there's, as Vernie, you said, you know, there's so much competition for tech talent in the sector, you know, given how much we can pay or not, you know, it's really very hard to retain talent. So what are we doing about it? Various things. I think we are trying to build capabilities of SSA staff, you know, in-house staff. You don't have to be an IT professional, but in-house staff. So I think it was just last week or 2 weeks ago, we signed an MOU with a couple of institutes of higher learning and CET centers. And basically the idea is to really make these programs so accessible to SSAs, and they're almost fully funded, right? 90% funded. And we peg it at different levels because we know that, first of all, the leaders must understand tech. You know, they must understand how to drive that digitalization agenda. So we have programs for leaders. We have programs for, you know, managers, people who need to, you know, work with vendors and so on. So you know, I quote an SSA, you know, a very good thing. She said, you know, sometimes the vendors bully us, you know, because they think that we don't know the technology and we don't know how to ask the right questions. So some of our programs hope to address that. And also, you know, general training for all staff so that there's a sense of, you know, what can data do for you? You know, how can you embrace tech more in your work? So some of these capability building we're trying to do. At the same time, you know, for those who do require more maybe specific tech support or more, yeah, they just want to ramp up more, right? Their IT, and we have SSAs like this. We are also hoping to you know, provide more support for manpower. And currently, actually, with the Jobs Growth Initiative, there is a lot of incentive for SSAs to also, you know, bring in talent who might be from corporates, but who might run a different, you know, who want to give back. This is a really good time to do it, and we're going to provide extra support for it. Of course, you know, at the same time, and I saw some questions, so I'm just going to try and address some of it along the way. Whether there are, you know, sort of easy systems that we can just take and use and adopt. And there certainly are. In fact, that's exactly what we advocate. You know, please don't build your own. Please use ready tech. You know, please use freeware if that's all you need. Don't overspec it. And we launched Tech and Go a few months ago. And the idea there is, you know, we put out there pre-scoped IT solutions, you know, for the things that we know SSAs would typically need, you know, HR, finance. I think I saw volunteer management, donor management. So the kinds of applications that most SSAs would need, pre-scope IT solutions, you know, just look at our website and hopefully something meets your needs, and then we provide funding for it. But we also know, and this was also another question, it's not one size fits all, right? Every SSA has different needs. There are those who are really very far ahead, who are talking about, you know, how do I link up my databases so that I have a complete view of my client? You know, I know the family, I know the senior, I know the child. So for those, we know they need a different solution. You know, we have more bespoke solutions, more customized solutions, comes with consultancy, scoping, and so on. So also SSAs would be free to take advantage of that. And those really at the leading edge, we do want to work with them to completely think about how technology can reinvent the way you deliver services and use that as a model for the rest of the sector. So different ways in which we are trying to build this capability and help SSAs.
Can I add to what Lisan mentioned about the simpler tools that are available on the market? In the work that we do with the organizations we've spoken to, actually there's an implicit mental model that our needs are very unique. Therefore, the tool that we need needs to be customized to us, and it needs to be, custom designed, custom developed. Actually, we're very worried about custom developed tools. We're also very worried about bespoke tools that have a very niche user base. So if you're using a solution that has 20 clients, I would be very worried about the future of that company. What we prefer to do actually is find a way to use tools that people are already familiar with. Google Sheets, Google Docs, email, and find a way to automate all of that so that it looks like magic and it delivers the same results, but without you having to learn a new system. Actually, what you want to do is be able to put in data into a form on a volunteer. It goes somewhere into a database. To us, that database could just be something as simple as Google Sheets. It processes the data in a certain way. You don't need to understand how that works. We can explain that to you and we can work with you on that. But we don't need to build a custom solution to get all of that done. Today, all of the simple tools that we use can already be adapted to meet all of these needs. And I accept that there are some very high-end requirements that may not be able to do this, but our sense is that for the vast majority of organizations out there, we encourage them to stick to the simpler, more widely used tools, because you have certainty that 5 years from now, you won't need to keep relearning a new software every time. It will probably be around in some form. Maybe Google Sheets version 2 will look slightly different, but given that you'll probably use it in your daily life, the chances of you having to deliberately skill somebody up to learn a new software is lower.
Right.
Maybe I can add on to Gaurav's point as well, because I completely agree, because especially if you're an organization that depends a lot on volunteers, and volunteers do come and go. You don't want to be reliant on a particular technology that nobody else except the developer knows how to build or how to adapt. And you need to have a simple enough technology, commonly used enough, that different volunteers can come to help you do stuff like any kind of adaptations you need, tweaking, etc. So in terms of continuity and also cost, you do not want to get held ransom by a very sophisticated piece of technology that nobody else knows how to use. Then I think that would not be so good.
Perfect. There are actually a lot of questions in the QA about this topic. So let's stay on this a bit more because of this immense interest in this topic. So we have a question from Pei-Chen Tay, who is, I would let one of our dear Singaporeans who is working for the Greater London Authority. Maybe she'll come back soon at some point. But Pei-Chen says, do you agree that diversity inclusion in the tech sector is important to ensure that digital products and services work for everyone? And if so, what digital standards, best practices, or design principles, or other approaches or ideas you have you seen in your sector to ensure that digital is a driver or a uniter and not a divider? So yeah, some questions here on how tools, how we can adopt tools to make sure that they unite rather than divide us. Are there any thoughts on this?
Can I jump in first very quickly on this? Because this is the main reason why we didn't want to have an entire organization of 20-something-year-old coders. It's not that they're bad people, they're wonderful people. But if you don't have the mother of two, if you don't have the slightly older Singaporean as part of your team, the way that you think about technology solutions might not be the right way that every Singaporean wants to interact with technology. Simple examples, just in terms of button size. So one of the projects that we supercharged was this translate4.sg. It's basically for healthcare workers who are going down to the migrant worker dorms to be able to communicate in any one of the migrant worker languages. Obviously, they can't speak the language, but the initial expectation was that these healthcare workers could just use Google Translate and kind of show it to the workers. But when you're wearing gloves and you've got all of this equipment on, you can't type on your phone. And that was not something that our coders thought about, but it was something that we have a doctor who's been outfield, and she was like, look, I'm wearing gloves. I'm not going to be able to type small words. Can you just make big buttons that I can smash with like a big finger and let that do the work? This also comes to the conversation that we have when we are building tools that address a slightly older segment of our population. We don't want to have finicky little buttons. You want to have a big, clearly labeled button. Again, these are not things that if we didn't have that diversity within our own team, we would have thought of. Even things about gender issues, when we design technology, the terms we use, the way in which we design the technologies sometimes do have an impact. One of the tools that we're building specifically, so we obviously deal with social issues directly, We're building a tool to help other Singaporeans gain empathy for people who are minorities, not just in terms of race and religion, but also gender. And gender is not really a minority, but they are in some senses a minority. I think Carrie can speak more on this. But the tool is basically, for the older ones in the group, a choose your own adventure game. It's an interactive fiction story where people play their lives out as somebody else. And you go through the heartaches and the challenges and the frustrations of that person based on real stories to see what life would have been like if you had not been born as yourself. Now, obviously, we can't do this if we're just a bunch of young, homogenous coders. We need that diversity within our team to make sure that we're building something that's relevant. And I think that when we extrapolate this to even tech organizations or social organizations, that diversity brings something valuable to the conversation every single time. I have not been in a team where the person who had a different opinion was not valuable. So there's a lot of double negative incentives, but you get where I'm going from.
Yeah.
Indeed. Lisa, no, Carrie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in. So actually, I'm just bringing in also some of my work in my previous role at the Ministry of Communications and Information, where we talked a lot about digital inclusion. And, you know, we had promulgated this idea of inclusion by design. You know, this idea that actually things can be designed from the outset to be inclusive. You know, why is it that Apple, right, their products can be just so intuitively used by a 3-year-old, 4-year-old without having to read a manual? You know, why is it that all our applications need tomes of manuals just to figure out? And we're still, right, people who are not so literate, not just digitally literate, but also literate in English, for example, you know, would have great trouble navigating some apps and some information websites. So some of these things, you know, if we can really, you know, have more inclusion by design, you know, design principles, you know, and Gaurav talked about, you know, how we need everybody at the table, ethnographers, you know, designers, to really understand how people use tech and how to make tech more accessible. I think that would go a long way. Then, of course, you know, quite apart from how we design it, you know, I think, you know, there are really no easy answers. I think it is going to be a challenge, and it's a moving target, because you can teach people today, but tomorrow the tech moves and you have to teach again. It is a moving target. There are no easy answers, but I think we just have to be really very deliberate about making sure that, you know, we bring people along, you know, intergenerational teaching, which serves more than just teaching tech, right? It also serves bonding. It helps the society come together. So I think we have to be very deliberate about that.
Thanks, Lisa. And Carrie, did you have thoughts about digital inclusion?
Well, I think as with all endeavors, like especially, you know, I mean, tech, anything else, what is really important is being user-centric, right? And nowadays we have design thinking. But what we mean by user-centric is, you know, whether or not, you know, the people developing the tech is truly and fully inclusive. We're all working still towards that for more diverse representation. But I think what is really important is deep listening to the needs of the people that you're designing tech for. And one example is a recent one that I got to know about is, we work closely, we were aware, is how, you know, they have a women's helpline where you can call in and someone can talk to you and hear out your problems. They've also recently designed a text messaging platform, because for people who are trapped in situations of domestic violence, often they don't have the privacy at home or the circumstances to allow them to talk to someone on the phone. And text messaging support system or support platform offers a more accessible way for them to reach out to someone. So these are very, very deep insights that you will not get to know if you didn't work with the stakeholders and the people themselves involved in situations like this. So regardless, you know, I think listening to the end client is hugely important. While we continue to make headway towards more diverse representation.
No, indeed. I like, especially like the point about user friendliness. Lisa, something was just saying made me think of my nephew, who's not even 2, who already knows how to say, "Hey Siri," and activate the Samsung camera, and you know, and he knows how to swipe. So yeah, the days of having to train to use technology, I think, are way behind us. We actually have a question from Ku Casey from another perspective, which is, what is your advice for a fresh grad on what skills they need to take up to better equip themselves to work in the social sector going forward? Carrie, maybe you, since you work at a charity and you're, you know, or at least you have experience with a charity, what would you like to see in fresh grads coming forward into the sector?
Well, I think, well, again, it's actually not very different from my earlier point about, I think deep listening skills is critical. Open-mindedness. I'm not sure whether you call these traits or skills lah, but if you had to talk about skills, then, you know, if you can truly and have deep insight and a curiosity to understand people's issues, and then have problem-solving skills to identify what the barriers are and be creative in identifying possible solutions, that would be fantastic. And the other kind of skills is what I call bridging skills. Like, you may not be the techie, but you're able to translate what you understand of the work that you do or the work that people do in the social sector to the technologist, right? Because often I think it's a loss in translation problem that the tech that's designed or the tech that is used is not fully or well applied to the actual needs. Then there's a whole lot of manpower, resources, and finances gone down the drain. So I think being able to understand issues and translate that, being versatile in the languages of different domains, you know, that would be very important. I mean, that's from my personal experience.
Right.
You need to be able to talk to civil society people and government people, right. For example. Or, you know, talk to a social worker and be the bridge between the social worker, for example, to the guy designing the tech. And I think that would be a tremendously valuable trait or skill to have going forward.
Lisa, what are your thoughts about what fresh grads should be, what skills fresh grads should be building?
You know, I think for this sector, if you want to come in, I think passion and commitment are so important. You know, it is in this sector there are challenges, right? I mean, the work itself is not easy. That there's a lot of emotional burden also. You know, working with vulnerable families, individuals. Sometimes you can't divorce your own emotions from the issues that you're dealing with, and you know there are challenges that come in numerous forms, right? Fundraising is a perennial sort of concern of SSA. So I would say, you know, if you have a heart for the sector, you have passion, you have commitment, I think that goes a long way. But of course, that's in and of itself is not enough. I mean, there are obviously specific professional skills depending on what you're interested in actually doing, counseling or social work and so on. But that quality, that passion, I think is so important. I wanted to reinforce Carrie's point also about you know, being a connector, because precisely because of all the things we said earlier, right? You do need to connect. You need to bring different stakeholders on board. You need to advocate sometimes for your cause. This idea of, you know, being a connector, being able to know, you know, which buttons to press, you know, who to go to, I think it's really important as well.
Thanks all. We also have actually a number of questions about how we sustain volunteers or professionals' involvement in the social sector. So how do we ensure that the upsurge in volunteering and giving in the sector actually continues? So for example, we have a question from Tan Chin Chong, who is the president of the Association for Persons with Special Needs. How do we ensure that techies are able to take time away from tech, for example, and to contribute to the sector? How do we ensure that volunteers continue to do so beyond the current pandemic? So maybe Gaurav, you want to start?
Yeah, no, this is an important question. I think one of the things that we've recognized is that we are running an organization. We are running a tech organization that needs to be efficient, not because we've got KPIs or profit, but because the time that our volunteers is providing is extremely valuable. So if we don't sort ourselves out, and if we are inefficient in the way that we do things, if we are not productive in delivering value to the communities that we are trying to help, our members will get frustrated and their time would not have been used wisely. So very early on, again, we decided that our process needs to take this into account. A few things. One is I would recommend organizations really think through how do you onboard new members into your team to set their expectations up front about what kind of time and value what kind of time you expect from them and what kind of value they can provide in that time. The second is you work out your internal processes to make sure that your volunteers' time is well utilized. So internally, we have what we call the project guide. It's a 4-stage process. The first stage is understanding the problem. The second stage is understanding how the solutions might look like. The third stage is actually building the solution. And the fourth stage is deploying it live and working with the customer or the client to apply the technology. In each of these stages, the weight of effort of different parts of our community is different. Obviously, in the development stage, our developers will be the most heavily involved. So this then tells the developers, hey, if a project is in stage 1 and 2, you're welcome to jump in, but we won't be utilizing your talents heavily in this stage. So you're welcome, but you don't have to. But in stage 3, once the team has handed over a problem statement, which is well scoped to you, we expect you to step up a little bit more in that stage. And then the other members know, hey, now this thing has gone to stage 3, I can go back to my life. And then we are very transparent about which stage different projects are at, what skill sets they need, what specific contributions we expect from specific members, to the point where actually it doesn't require us to have equal misery. We don't require people to sit in a room for 3 hours if not all 3 hours for all 50 people is going to be equally utilized.
Right.
I'll give you a specific example. If you're doing a consultation with a client who wants a website redesign, your first team is the consulting team, and we have ex-consultants from Accenture and the rest who go there to do a needs analysis. I don't need developers at that stage. But when we come to, let's say, the interface design, actually, it doesn't take interface designers 3 hours of listening to needs analysis to come up with a better user interface. They can read the statement, and some of them who are really good, it's like half an hour and they're done. And this is because this is their professional skill set. We have developers whose professional skill sets don't require them to spend a lot of time, and they can immediately add value. So making them waste time is really detrimental to us. Yep. So what we're hoping, and this one I cannot assure, but what we're hoping is that because we've designed our process to be efficient with our volunteers' time, it is easier for them to sustain this after COVID and hopefully longer term. And it also, what we've seen is that other members, so our current members, are very keen to bring in new members on a per project basis, on a per issue basis, on a per skill set basis, and then they leave. So that's perfectly fine with us. We operate a rotating door system. People come and go, support projects, and come back in whenever they're ready. We don't need to, and I think this is probably unique to our volunteering model, we don't need to hold on to volunteers in large numbers just for the sake of it. I want skill sets on projects. That's it.
Lisa, from your perspective, how does NCSS think we can build and sustain the willingness of Singaporeans to give?
Yes, so to give and to volunteer, maybe let me talk a little bit about volunteering first, because we've done quite a bit of work on volunteer management. We did a poll of volunteers, volunteer satisfaction. And actually it was really interesting. What, volunteers fed back that would keep them most engaged and that would have them keep on coming back is really this idea that they connect with the mission of the agency. And I think what was a little bit surprising, I guess, though it shouldn't be, is that they want to be trained. They want to be given the skills to really, do their volunteer work well. So that I think is very striking. We also have a volunteer management framework that's readily available, and I'm just going to rattle off the 6 steps in our volunteer management framework. So I think one very important point is, your organization has to be volunteer ready. It cannot be a situation where the staff are feeling resentful. What's the volunteer doing? Why is he doing my work? I can do the work better. So I think, that getting your organization ready is very important. The second one is, what are your needs? And this is what Gaurav talked about, right? What are your needs? What do you need volunteers to do? Be very clear about identifying the needs, scope it out properly in a meaningful way. Third one is, recruit and select your volunteers. Who are the kinds of profiles you need? What do you need them to do? Number 4, very, very important. You have to onboard and train them. They have to be equipped to do this work for you, with you. Number 5, you have to support them. You have to recognize them. It may not be monetary. In fact, it shouldn't be, right? I mean, it's volunteer. We don't want it to be too transactional, but there must be a way where they feel that they are gaining something, whether they're learning something or they're being recognized, acknowledged. And of course, number 6 is we have to review actually how is it working? Is it working well, and so on. To your question on giving, Actually this period, we were overwhelmed by the generosity of Singaporeans. I think Singaporeans are actually very generous people. And when there's a cause that moves them, they do step up. So we had astounding donations for COVID-related causes, Courage Fund, Invictus Fund. We are a little bit concerned about the regular programs, and so this is also a pitch to everyone out there. If you're thinking of giving, do also give to ComChest more generally, because that is where the needs are. That would allow our social service agencies to continue providing their very much needed services.
Yeah, indeed. And I also know that there are also like tech platforms that we can use, like Giving.SG or SG Cares, to sort of like to continue to engage people. Just to remind Singaporeans, you can also check out those platforms if you're looking for opportunities to keep engaged. Carrie, from your perspective, from Daughters of Tomorrow, how is DOT continuing to engage volunteers and ensure that their continued involvement sustains beyond the pandemic?
I think to add on to Lisan's point about volunteer management, I think there are two key questions that we always keep in mind at Daughters of Tomorrow, which is from the perspective of the volunteer. If you stand in their shoes, right? The key questions that usually they will be concerned with is, number one, what impact am I making? And number two, what am I gaining out of this? Right? I think it would be a mistake for social service agencies to expect volunteers to keep giving and keep giving and keep giving and not getting anything in return. Right. But I think the gains that they're getting and how we frame it is, what value are we creating for them as an organization when volunteers come? Are they growing in their professional skills? Are they gaining a network? Are they growing personally? Do they have personal development out of the engagement and the work that they do with us? And importantly, what impact are they making, or what impact am I making as a volunteer? And this is where I think when we make a very, very intentional effort to share success stories or stories of progress, and then how volunteers have contributed to the progress made by our beneficiaries and our women, so that they're constantly updated with the fact that they could do this one thing, which may not, it may not be a lot, but it actually created such a big impact. And I think on the system level, what we saw was a very good encouraging incentive for volunteers to come forward were companies who had mechanisms within their CSR program that created a multiplier effect for their staff's participation. So for example, at Apple, when the Apple staff comes and spends an hour with us, for every hour that one Apple volunteer does volunteering, the company donates X dollars to the organization. So it's like win-win, right? And I guess sometimes because people are busy, they have their work commitments, family commitments, they may not feel like they can give a lot of their time, but they would like to know, if I was to be able to give this small amount of my time, what can I impact? What is the dent am I making? And I think creating a magnifier, multiplier impact with the time, limited time that they can give, goes a huge way to incentivize people to get involved.
Thanks so much. We're actually running out of time, so maybe the last 10 minutes, and I could beg just an extra 10 minutes. And the closing question for all three of you, to get you to reflect on what you would change, if anything, about the way digitalization has progressed in the social sector in Singapore. What would you like to see more of, or less of, or change in any other way? So maybe we'll start with Carrie, with Gaurav, and then finally with Lisan. So Carrie, go ahead, please.
Well, I think digitalization is really a component of capabilities and capacity building for organizations, right? And I think the mindsets of donors and funders, it would be helpful if they can be more open to giving towards capacity building of the organization, instead of being locked in the mindset that whatever they give has to reach the clients or beneficiaries directly. Capacity building is key. And I think as part of that, as part of grant making, as part of approving grants, assessing grants, it would actually be helpful if grant makers have a team of tech people who knows the a wide enough range of technologies that are applicable to social service agencies for them to be able to, yes, like people like Gaurav, right? So if I tell him, Gaurav, you know, I'm going to embark on a Salesforce journey and Salesforce is going to help us in this ways, he gets it immediately. I don't have to write like a 10-page document explaining how Salesforce is going to help each and every component of my operations in different ways, which was unfortunately the experience we had with a certain funding agency. I'm not going to name names. It was very painful. It was very painful. And I'm not sure that the process of trying to access that grant was really worth it. So if you could make it easier, grant makers having tech people on board to help assess the merits of the technology so that the organizations, the SSAs themselves don't have to break it down into such minute detail for the grant maker to understand. That would be a huge help.
Thanks, Kerry. Gaurav, over to you.
It's hard for me to answer this question because I think we are at that we've crossed that tipping point actually. I would say prior to December or January this year, I spent most of my time trying to persuade people to digitize, to explain to people, actually, you could do a lot of stuff if you digitize this, if you converted this to an automated process, if you let us help you. And so I spent most of my time and effort and energy trying to persuade people that tech was right. It was a good direction. We've crossed that tipping point now. Everybody's like, okay, tech is here to stay. Let's make the best of it. And now we're at the position where we're trying to figure out how to use tech, not why tech is important or whether tech should be part of my organization, but how we can use it best. And so I do think that the next bound of conversations that I will be having with organizations and that the whole social service sector will be having amongst themselves is how can we do this better? How can we find better solutions? How can we think about technology in a better way? How can we upskill our members to use technology better? That to me is the real game changer here. And it's not about deficiencies or gaps or challenges in the current models. It's about the right conversations being had by the right people. And it was not easy to get to this point. For the people who have been in this sector, so I've volunteered in nonprofit organizations and I've led nonprofit organizations before that were not technology based. And to encourage that group of my own volunteers, even though I'm a techie, to encourage my own volunteers to digitize was always an uphill journey. So I think that I'm extremely optimistic. I'm always optimistic, but I'm extremely optimistic that the groups that are listening today, the people that are having these conversations are having the right types of conversations now. So whatever gaps there are, I'm confident they'll address them.
Great, Gaurav, thanks. Lisa?
Okay, I agree with Gaurav that we have turned the corner. But if there's one thing that I hope will shift, it's really culture and mindset to be even more embracing of possibilities. This growth mindset to see possibilities and to really, do what you believe in and not just what you're funded for. I think in this sector that there's a little bit of maybe well-founded concerns about, am I going to be funded for this? Will there be long-term funding for this? Yes, I know you're giving me funding for 2 years, but what happens thereafter? A lot of decisions are unfortunately driven by these considerations, which may be valid, but it may then also mean that you lose the opportunity, to really invest and do something that will make a difference for your organization. So, this growth mindset, this curiosity, this wanting to try, I think that's really very important. And I just want to give one example. So, Food from the Heart, we were so impressed. They had invested in some of this really early. How do we have a nationwide distribution effort, make it easier for volunteers? And they had invested in some of these digitalization, IT systems, and after showing that it works, then they work with funders, they look for donors, with a proven product. And we hope, more social service agencies can embrace that spirit, right? Do what you believe in, show that it works, and then convince donors. And maybe just one last point, because I do see it in the Q&A that, high tech should not be at the expense of high touch. I think we really, we feel very strongly that high tech means that it allows us to do our work better. It allows us to, use our human resources better so that we can spend more time with our clients, with our end users, with our vulnerable families and so on, and deliver even better, higher quality service.
Thanks, Lisa and Gaurav and Carrie, for actually helping us to help us end on a positive note, right? Actually, to reflect on the opportunities for tech to undo our previous assumptions about what is and is not possible, for helping us to turn what we think of as constraints into actually possibilities. But yes, thank you for spending this hour with us, and thank you as well to the audience for coming tonight. This is not going to be the last, I think, a webinar in the Smart Nation and Conversation series. To find out more, it's on Facebook. So if you go there to the Smart Nation in Conversation series page, you can see upcoming webinars itself. This webinar itself is also going to be put on YouTube. Just wait a couple of days, and if you want to catch up, that's great. Thank you to everybody, and again, once again, thank you to our panelists, and good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thanks so much.